Hey everyone, my name's Will Valida. I'm a software engineer and Microsoft MVP for Azure Cloud Native Technologies, and this is a special video for the Azure Back to School 2024 virtual conference. This was my second session for the conference, and in this session, we're going to be talking about self-service Azure infrastructure with Azure Deployment Environments. So in this video, I'm going to cover what Azure Deployment Environments are, when we would use Azure Deployment Environments, what the benefits of Azure Deployment Environments are, and I'll also discuss some key concepts that are related to Azure deployment environments. We'll then jump into a demo and see how we can use Azure deployment environments to simplify infrastructure deployments in Azure. Now, let's start with the problem statement. So, imagine you're a developer that's entering a team for a first time and you want to get started as quickly as possible. Now, the current process to get any kind of infrastructure provision for your application that you're testing or developing can be pretty complex. So you might need to find out where you actually need to get access to be able to use a test environment. And then once you've found that out, you might have to raise a support request or a ticket to actually request access to that environment or request a new environment entirely. Then you'll have to provide some context about what you're doing because somebody else is going to have to manually approve that. You're going to have to provide details about the application you're building, etc., because that person may not have the context. And that requires, clarifying requirements with platform engineers, particularly if you're an application developer and you don't actually have the permissions to provision the environment yourself. You'll have to describe the architecture that you're building, talk to a platform engineer, and also clarify what exactly it is that you need, because you might need a different SKU, you might need different services, etc. And this can take a bit of time because you're going back and forth on different requirements. And then once you've got those requirements clarified, you've got to wait for the administrators to go ahead and create and provision that infrastructure for you. It's not something that you can do very easily. It takes time to configure and make sure the infrastructure is actually provisioned correctly. And then you have to validate whether your application code actually works on that test environment. And if there aren't any problems, that's great, but usually there are. So you'll have to do a bit of testing on your application code, test it against the infrastructure that's been deployed, and there may be that requirement where you talk to administrators to actually re-clarify the requirements and then make updates to that test environment to make sure that it's working. And this process repeats every time you want to try and test something or test something new within your application. So again, it's this whole cycle which takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money, and causes a lot of pain for both application developers and platform engineers. So one of the ways that we can actually answer this is to use Azure Deployment Environments. And what Azure Deployment Environments essentially do is they help development teams to quickly and easily spin up app infrastructure using project-based templates that establish consistency and best practices while maximizing security. This on-demand access to secure environments accelerates the different stages of software development in a compliant and cost-effective way. Now, here's a bit of a diagram just kind of explaining an overview of what Azure deployment environments are. But essentially, a deployment environment is a collection of Azure infrastructure resources defined in a template called an environment definition. Developers can deploy infrastructure defined in the templates in subscriptions where they have access, Azure subscriptions where they have access, and then build their applications on top of that infrastructure. Platform engineers can create and manage environment definitions. So to specify which environment definitions are available to developers, platform engineers can associate environment definitions with projects and then assign permissions to those developers. They can also apply Azure governance based on the type of environment, such as a sandboxing environment, a testing environment, UAT, or even a production environment. So this diagram is kind of an overview of the capabilities in Azure deployment environments. So platform engineers define infrastructure templates and configure subscriptions, identities, and permissions, while developers can create environments based on the templates and then build and deploy applications on top of the infrastructure. Environments can support different scenarios like on-demand environments, sandbox environments for testing, and even CI/CD pipelines for continuous integration and continuous deployment. So when we use this, so think about kind of two different personas that we're working with here, and I've mentioned them before, so platform engineers and developers. So let's start with some platform engineering scenarios where we would actually use Azure deployment environments. So Azure Deployment Environments helps platform engineers apply the right set of policies and settings on various types of environments. It also helps control the resource configurations that developers can create, and it also helps us to track environments across projects. So using Azure Deployment Environments, platform engineers can perform the following tasks. They can provide project-based curated set of reusable infrastructure as code templates. They can define specific Azure deployment configurations per project and per environment type. And they can provide a self-service experience without having to give control over subscriptions. And we can also track costs and ensure compliance with the enterprise governance policies that affect our organizations. Now, for developers, developers can create environments whenever they need them and then develop their applications on top of that infrastructure. Developers can use Azure deployment environments to deploy pre-configured environments for any stage of the development lifecycle. They can use it to spin up a sandbox environment to explore Azure, and they can also create and manage environments either through the developer portal, the Azure CLI, or with the Azure Developer CLI, which is pretty cool. So what are the benefits? So I've talked a little bit about the benefits, but let's try and summarize it of what the actual benefits of Azure deployment environments are to create, configure, and manage environments in Azure. So first off, you get a benefit of standardization and collaboration. So the ability to capture and share infrastructure as code templates and source control within your team and organization to easily create on-demand environments. And this helps promote collaboration through inner sourcing of templates from various source control repositories. There's also compliance and governance benefits as well. So platform engineering teams can curate environment definitions to enforce enterprise security policies and map projects to Azure subscriptions, identities, and permissions by environment types and alleviate that burden from their software engineering teams. There's also project-based configurations, so you can organize environment definitions by the type of application that your development teams are working on, rather than having an unorganized list of templates or any kind of traditional infrastructure as code setup. There's also self-service capabilities, so you can actually enable your development teams to quickly and easily spin up app infrastructure, whether that's PaaS, serverless, or even IaaS resources, by using a set of pre-configured templates. And you can also track costs on these resources to stay within your budgets. And there's integration with your existing toolchain, so you can use APIs to provision environments directly from your preferred continuous integration tool, integrated development environment, or your automated release pipelines. And you can also use comprehensive command line tools as well. So now that we've just gone through an overview of what Azure deployments are, let's take a deeper dive into the key components of Azure deployment environments. And so we start with the Dev Center. This resource contains a collection of projects that require similar settings. As platform engineers, we can use dev centers to use catalogs to manage our infrastructure as code templates that are available to projects, and use environment types to configure the types of environments that development teams can create. Projects represent a team or a business function within your overall organization. So when you associate a project with a dev center, all the settings for the dev center are automatically applied to the project. Each project can be associated with only one dev center, and platform engineers can configure environments for a project by specifying which environment types are appropriate for the development team. To make environment definitions available to specific development teams, administrators of the project can attach a catalog to a project. To allow developers to create their own deployment environments, we have to provide developers with access to the project, and this is all done through managed identities. Environments are a collection of Azure resources on which your application is deployed. So say, for example, you have a web application that uses an app service, SQL database, Key Vault, App Insights, etc. In your environment, you can have both PaaS and IaaS resources that help support that application. Now, with Azure Deployment Environments, you can define the types of environments that your development teams can create. So this provides the flexibility to name the environments in Azure Deployment Environments to match the ones that your enterprise uses, along with the ability to configure settings for those environment types based on the needs of your development teams. So if you imagine the various different environments that you use within your team or organization, you might have a dev environment, a UAT environment, and a prod environment. The configuration between across those various different environments are going to be different because of the nature of those environments, and you can actually replicate that behavior in Azure deployment environments as well. Now, project environment types are a subset of the environment types that you configure for the Dev Center. This helps us configure the types of environments that specific development teams can create. Project environment types allow you to automatically apply the right set of policies on environments and help extract responsibilities from your development teams. Now let's cover catalogs. So essentially what catalogs are is they help you provide a set of curated infrastructure as code templates for your development teams to create environments. Essentially, you can attach a catalog to a dev center that makes environment definitions available to all projects associated with that dev center. You can also attach a catalog to a project to provide provide environment definition, to that specific project. Now you can attach catalogs from either GitHub repositories or Azure DevOps Services repositories and attach them as catalogs. And deployment environments will essentially scan the specified folder of the repository to find all the environment definitions within that repository. Those environment definitions are then made available to all projects that are associated with the Dev Center. And then finally, an environment definition is a combination of an infrastructure as code template that's written in Bicep, Terraform, or Pulumi, and an environment variable that acts as a manifest. The template will define the environment, and then the environment file will provide metadata about the template, which includes which parameters to use to actually provision that template. Your development teams will use the items that you provide in the catalog to go ahead and create environments in Azure. So we've spent a bit of time talking about what Azure deployment environments are and what they do. So let's dive into a demo and see it in action. So we'll take a tour about how we can actually set up Azure deployment environments, and this includes creating resources such as the Dev Center, environment types, and projects. And then I'll show you how you can actually give access to your developers to your environments, and then add a catalog from GitHub which stores our templates, which we can share with our developers. And then finally, I'll show you how you can consume those templates from your Dev Center to provision infrastructure in your Azure environment. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's set up all the resources that we're going to need to support our Azure deployment environment. So in this kind of section, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to create and configure a dev center. We're going to attach a catalog to the dev center and define some environment types. Then we're going to associate a project with the dev center, add environment types to that, and then allow developers to access the project. So remember, the Dev Center is going to be our top level resource for Azure deployment environments, and that's going to contain the collection of development projects. In the Dev Center, we will specify the common configuration for our projects, such as catalogs within application templates, and also the types of environments for which development teams can deploy their code. Now, as platform engineers, we would typically set up the Dev Center, attach external catalogs to the Dev Center, create projects, and provide access to the development teams ourselves, which means our development teams can go ahead and create environments by using environment definitions. Then they can connect to individual resources and deploy applications. Now, so a couple of prerequisites. First thing first, you will need an Azure account to do this, and you're also going to need role-based access control with permissions to create and manage resources within your subscription, such as contributor or owner. But the first thing we're going to do is create our Dev Center. So to do that, what I can do is just type in Dev Center in the search bar here and click on Dev Centers. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a new Dev Center. So I'm going to put all of this in a new resource, Azure Back to School. There you go. That's going to be my resource group. And then for the name, I'm just going to put WV Dev Center. And that should be right. Yes, it is. And I'm going to deploy all of these resources into, let's go, Let's go Canada Central. Let's give some love to Canada. We can attach quick start catalogs as well. So remember that Microsoft DevBox and Azure Deployment Environments kind of share the resource of a dev center. For this one, I will add the Azure Deployment Environment definitions. So that Microsoft do provide a quick start catalog. But we can go ahead and add that quick start one for ourselves. So I'm going to click on review and create. Validation is passed. I'm going to go ahead and create that. And while that's creating, I will speed up this part of the video just to make sure that's provisioned correctly and you guys don't watch me provision infrastructure. Cool, and there we go. Our dev center has been created successfully. So now what I'm going to do is go to the resource and I should be taken to the overview pane of my dev center. Fantastic. Now, to allow our developers to create environments, the dev center is going to require permissions on the subscriptions because when developers create environments, it's not them as individual users that are doing it. It's the dev center that's actually performing the operations on the subscription itself. So in order to do that, what we're going to need to do is attach an identity to the dev center and then assign necessary permissions to that identity. So with Dev Center, you can attach either system assigned managed identities or user assigned managed identities. For this one, we're just going to configure a system identity or system assigned managed identity for our Dev Center and then assign roles to the managed identity to allow the Dev Center to create environment types within our subscription. So this is fairly straightforward. So under the settings tab here, I'm going to go and click identity. And all I'm going to do is make sure system assigned is selected, not user assigned. So system assigned is selected. I'm going to switch that to on and then go ahead and save that. And that's going to enable my system assigned managed identity. So once that is done, we can go ahead and give the managed identity some roles where we can actually allow our dev center to configure project environment types, etc., etc. So what I need to do is under the permissions here, click on Azure role assignments. And I'm going to add a role assignment here. So the scope over the subscription, and I'm going to use my current subscription and I'm just going to search for contributor. There it is. Go ahead and add that. Once that's added, I'll go ahead and add another permission over the subscription. And this time, come on, there it is. I'm going to use the user access administrator permission and save that. Cool, so those role assignments have been granted. And there we go. So if I go back into my dev center, get rid of the notifications. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is create an environment type. So we use environment types to help us define the different types of environments that our development teams can deploy. So in my dev center here, go back, and what I want to do is scroll down to environment configuration and then click environment types. Now I haven't got any environment types already, so what I want to do is create. And I'm just going to create one for the moment. I'm going to call this one development. Go ahead, and I can actually add tags to this as well. So I can either go ahead and just go environments and then just give this a value of dev if I wanted to. There it is. Cool, go ahead and add, and then that should create an environment type for my development environment. And I can do this for production, staging, etc. When we add environment types to our dev center, that's going to be available for each project in the dev center. But environment types aren't enabled by default. So when we enable environment type at the project level, the environment type determines the managed identity and subscriptions that are used to deploy environments. So do keep that in mind. Now we're going to go ahead and create our first project. So remember that in Azure Deployment Environments, a project represents a team or business function within the organization. So for example, you might create a project for the implementation of an e-commerce application, which will have a development, staging, and production environment. For another project that might represent a domain within your organization, you really should match your projects in your Azure Deployment Environment resources to the domains or business functions that exist within your organization. And when you associate a project with a dev center, all the settings for the dev center are automatically applied to the project. And each project can only be associated with one dev center. So this dev center really should encapsulate your entire organization, and the project should represent the teams or business functions that exist within your organization. So let's go ahead and create our first project. So here in my dev center, I'm going to go into projects, and I'm going to click on this create, and I'm going to create my first project. I can associate it to a dev center, so that WV dev center that we created before. And then for the name, I'm just going to name it e-commerce. And you can give it a little bit of a subscription if you want. We can attach some things like the dev box management. Remember that the dev center represents both or handles resources, for both DevBox and Azure Deployment Environments. We can also configure catalogs for it, so we can actually add the deployment environment definitions that exist for our dev center. We can also add some tags to this particular project as well. But I'm going to go ahead and review and create and click on create. Make sure I click create properly. And there we go. So my project has been created. So if I go to that resource now, I should see that project has been created successfully. Fantastic. Now, in Azure Deployment Environments, you've also got this idea or concept, of project environment types. And they're a subset of the environment types that you configure for your dev center. And they help you pre-configure the types of environments that specific development teams can create. So to configure a project environment type, you've got to go to your project in the Azure portal. And then under here for environment configuration, we want environment types. And we're going to go ahead and add an environment type. So essentially, we need to provide this with a little bit of information. So the type will be the actual environment type that this team can configure. So that's development. For deployment identity, we can use either a system-assigned managed identity for deployment or a user-assigned deployment identity. We'll use user-assigned for now. We can also provide some permissions on environment resources. So the environment creator role. If I look here, I can do owner or contributor. So that would give this environment type of the owner or contributor permissions for our development environment. And then once we've done that, we can also add tags to our resources, stuff like that. But I'm going to go ahead and add this. And that will go ahead and create my environment type for my e-commerce project. Now, just one thing to note here, at least one identity, a system assigned or user assigned identity, must be enabled for the deployment identity, because this identity is used to perform the environment deployment on behalf of the developer. Remember, it's not the developers themselves or their identity that are doing the deployment. We're making life a little bit more simpler for them by alleviating that burden from them and actually providing or supplying those permissions to our dev center, which is going to perform the environment deployment. And additionally, the identity attached to the dev center should be assigned the contributor and user access administrator roles for access to the deployment subscription for each environment type. Cool. So now that we've set everything up, we can go ahead and give access to the development team. So before developers can go ahead and create environments based on the environment types in a project, you have to provide access for them through a role assignment at the level of the project. The deployment environments user role, that's the role that we're going to use. This enables users to create, manage, and delete their own environments. And we ourselves have to have sufficient permissions on a project before we can go ahead and add users to it. So what I'm going to do, using my project, I'm still in my project, I'm not in my dev center. I'm going to go to Access Control Management, or IAM, sorry. And then I'm going to go add, and I'm going to add a role assignment. So the role that we're looking for, like I said, is that deployment environments user, that one there. So that's the role I'm going to use. And then I'm going to add my members to this role. So what I'm going to do is just search for my email address. There we are. And I'm going to review and assign, and then assign that role to my address. Now, just one thing to note here, only users who have the deployment environments user role, the Dev Center project admin role, or a built-in role that has the appropriate permissions can create an environment. So if you have a reader role, you may have seen a reader role, you can view your environment and other environments that have been created by others, but not, you can't go ahead and create it. Now, the missing piece here is we're going to need to add and configure a catalog from either GitHub or Azure repos. So if I click on this tab here, I see I've got a Dev Center catalog, which just has one bicep template for a simple container app. So if I just scroll down a little bit, here is a simple bicep template for all the resources that I need for a very simple container app. So I'm going to go back into the Azure portal, and within my project, under settings, I'm going to configure a project level catalog. So attaching catalogs at the project level enables platform engineers to provide curated environment definitions that are specific to the development teams. And additionally, it empowers dev team leads assigned as project admins to manage the environment definitions that's made available to their teams. So platform engineers will have full control over the use of catalogs at the project level, and the use of project level catalogs must be enabled at the dev center level before a catalog can be added to the project. So what I'm going to do, I am going to just go back into overview. Let's have a look at the resource group and just go into that dev center. And if I go into catalogs here, I'm going to add a catalog here at my dev center level. So there's the quick start definition that was added before. But what I'm going to do is just add a new catalog. I'm going to say this source from GitHub. I'm going to just say call this Woolvie catalog. It might match the name of your catalogs that you're using in there, but I can go ahead and actually sign in with GitHub. So I'm going to just drag that off screen while I sign in. And then I'm going to look for my repo. And this is the one that I want. So there we go. It's called Mantle Dev Center Catalog. And that's the catalog I'm going to use. I'm going to use the main branch. And then the folder definition is going to be environments. Now, we have got a couple of options that we can use to sync to this catalog. So you can imagine over time, more templates will be added to this. Templates will need to be updated as API versions change. So one thing that we can do is we can automatically sync this catalog, and that means every 30 minutes, essentially what happens is just basically a polling mechanism that checks the status of this catalog to make sure there aren't, if there are any changes, and then update the catalog. Or we can actually do it through a manual mechanism. So I'll do automatically for now, and I'm going to go ahead and add this catalog. And there we go. So that catalog sync has been completed. It looks like it's been successful. You can actually see a whole list of events. It's like an event log here. So if something was added, updated, if a sync failed, that is viewable here. But there we go. My catalog has now been successfully synced. Cool. Okay, so now we have everything set up to go ahead and deploy environments or deploy infrastructure to our Azure subscription. But before I'm going to do that, let's take a look at how we can actually add and configure environment definitions. So we set up our catalog, and an environment definition is really composed of at least two files. So you've got your template from an infrastructure as code framework. So this could be an ARM template, it could be a Bicep template, a Terraform template, and a Pulumi template, and a configuration file that essentially provides metadata about the template. And file is usually called, or should be named, sorry, an environment.yaml file. So let's take a look inside Visual Studio Code. And I'll just get some more real estate going. Here is the environment definition for my simple container app template. So again, if we look at the Bicep code, essentially all it is just really a Bicep template that defines my infrastructure that I need to support my container app. So this is fairly straightforward. If I open up the visualizer, I should see just essentially three resources. So for those of you who know a little bit about container apps, you'll have your container app environment that sits as a boundary around all of your container apps. I've only got the one container app here, and then a log analytics workspace. So all the logs admitted by our container apps that sit inside our environment are going to emit logs to that log analytics workspace. So it's fairly straightforward. There's nothing too complex going on here. To add the environment definition to a catalog in Azure Deployment Environments, we will need a environment definition, and that's through this YAML file here. So let me get rid of the visualizer and open up this YAML file. And essentially, this provides metadata about our environment definition and about our infrastructure as code template. So here you've got the name of the environment definition. You might have a version to it. This versioning is optional, but if you're evolving this template over time, it could be handy to have some versioning in place. You've got a summary, so a brief summary about what the environment definition is doing. You can add a description, which is a more detailed environment definition. You can have a runner. So essentially what the runner describes is the infrastructure as code framework that template uses. It can be ARM or Bicep, and it can also specify to a template stored in a container registry, and then also a template path as well. So this main.bicep. So this main.bicep file here is essentially telling it was where our infrastructure as code template sits. Now, you can use container images to define how templates for deployment environments are deployed. That's a little bit out of scope for this session. This session is just really a gentle introduction, but Azure Deployment Environment supports ARM and Bicep natively, so you can actually configure environment definitions that deploys Azure resources for a deployment environment by adding this template to our catalog. And then Azure Deployment Environments then uses a standard ARM or Bicep container image to create the deployment environment. But if you're working with other infrastructure as code providers such as Pulumi or Terraform, you can use custom container images for environment deployments. Cool, so that's just basically how we add environment definitions to our catalog that are made available to us. So now what we can do, if I go back into Google Chrome, is we can actually go ahead and deploy our environment definition. So let's go ahead and deploy that simple container app. So to do that, I'm going to go into this tab here, and it's called devportal.microsoft.com. That's where we're going to go. And you'll be prompted to sign in using the email address that we granted the role to earlier on. So this is my work email that I'm using. And to create a new environment, what I'm going to do is click on the new menu here and click on new environment. So I'm going to give this environment a name. So I'm just going to say dev sales site, and then I choose a project. So I'm going to choose the project we created earlier. And there's the environment type for my development environment that we created earlier as well. And then from here, I can select an environment definition. So there's that container app sitting in that WV catalog that we configured earlier. And one of the cool things that we can actually do when we provision environments is enable a scheduled deletion. So I'm going to go ahead and just click that. So, say if you're just doing a little bit of testing and you don't want to have this environment existing, or all the resources that make up this environment existing forever, we can actually schedule a deletion of those resources. So, it's the 14th of September at the moment. So, I could say I want to delete this on the 15th and I want to delete this at a certain time. So, say 6 o'clock at evening. And you can even work on different time zones as well. So I'm currently based in Melbourne, so I'm UTC plus 10. But there's a whole bunch of, depending on where your development teams are living, you can actually schedule a deletion in a time zone that's closest to them, which is pretty cool. So I've configured everything for my environment. So I'm going to click on Next. And here are the parameters for my container app environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump back into my environment.yaml file. Let me just get rid of that. And there's a property here for parameters. So you can see for this particular environment definition, I've provided or made available, a number of parameters that developers can go ahead and configure. So for this container app, I can configure the number of CPU cores, the amount of memory the container app has, which container image that the container app should use, and then also the location. And if we take a look at just the container image properties, it's got an ID, it's got a name, a description, so that helps your end users figure out what this parameter is used for, what type. So most of it is string, which is pretty neat. This should really match the parameters that you've defined in your Bicep or Terraform templates. And then also a default value as well. So if you're coming from a background where you know what Bicep and Terraform are, when you provide default values for your parameter, you would define it like this. And with that environment template, you can essentially do the same thing by providing a default parameter within your YAML file as well. So your parameters, the ones that you want to configure and make available or open up to developers so they can provision for themselves, you make that available through your environment.yaml file. So that's pretty neat. So that explains these parameters here. So again, the location, I'm going to give this 2 CPU cores. And then the location, I'm going to put as Australia East. And then I'm going to go ahead and create that. So provided that everything's valid, what's going to happen is that environment is going to go ahead and create the resources that I've defined in my Bicep template, and it's going to provision that within Azure itself. Okay, so I was having a bit of trouble with this one, so I just created a new one using the same template. So once that's actually created, we can access and manage our environments in this developer portal immediately. So to see the resources that have been deployed in Azure, just click on Environment Resources and sign into my Azure subscription, and I should be taken directly to the resource group. So remember, in our template, we had a container app environment, and log analytics workspace. That's all been deployed. So if I go into my container app, and as you go ahead and navigate to it, so there's my welcome to container apps ready and waiting for me to deploy my code to the infrastructure that's been deployed to this resource group. So the Dev Center has gone ahead, my Azure Deployment Environment has gone ahead and created a resource group for me, along with all the associated resources that I've defined in my Bicep template here, which is pretty cool. So rather than me having to kind of clone down this repository, get an understanding of how this template works, and then deploying it from my local machine as a developer, I can actually go ahead and go into the developer portal here and deploy this template, which deploys all the resources that I need to actually start developing and deploying my application to, so I can do a bit of testing with all the Azure resources that I need. Awesome. And then if we didn't want to keep these resources, I've put an expiration date and time on these resources, but I can go ahead and redeploy that template. So change the parameters here if I need to update anything with the resources. I can go ahead and change the expiration. I can find out more information on my resources, or I can go ahead and delete it, which I'll do there. Oh, and that's failed. Never mind. I've got a expiration date on that, so that should be cleaned up in a day or two. In a day. Cool. So that ends up this demo. Let's wrap up. So that wraps up this video on self-service infrastructure with Azure Deployment Environments. In this video, we learned what Azure Deployment Environments are and what benefits they can bring to both platform engineers and developers. We then provisioned our own Azure deployment environment and all the associated resources, such as projects and catalogs. I showed you how we can actually attach catalogs from GitHub or Azure DevOps to our dev centers. So then we can actually provide templates to our developers, which they can provision through the Microsoft Azure Deployment Environment portal. And I also showed you how you can add templates and what's required, not just the infrastructure as code template, but also the environment manifest. So we can actually use Azure Deployment Environments to deploy our infrastructure as code. Well, that wraps up this video. I hope you liked it. If you do, give it a like. If you want to see more videos on Azure, don't forget to subscribe. And of course, if you have any questions, please pop them in the comment section below. No matter where you are in the world, I hope you're having a great day, and we'll see you all next time.